Hello, welcome back to another episode of Somewhere Between a Film and TV podcast. It's so great to be back. Sorry guys, I was on vacation. So, what are we reviewing? We are going to be going over The Black Phone 2, directed by Scott Derrickson and written by C. Robert Cargill, with additional story help from Joe Hill, who also wrote the initial short story for the first one, which, of course, if we're going to get, nepotism out of the way, that is Stephen King's son. But I think that the storytelling ability is still there. You can't quite claim like, oh, this is just because this is a nepotism baby and it's not well done. I personally think that both of them are, but that's getting ahead of everything we're about to go over. What I will tell you right now is that everything we review here will always have full spoilers. So, if you don't want to know anything about The Black Phone 2, just know that overall I enjoyed it. It has a couple problems, but for everyone else, you want to talk about spoilers, you want to get into everything, let's go ahead and get into it. The Black Phone 2, the direct sequel to the first one, follows Mason Thames and as Finney and his sister, who I'm admittedly blanking on the name of, which I'm sorry because she's really, really great in this. And of course, this is about sort of the trauma left over from the events of the first one and this sort of tie between memory and what might actually be happening. And it starts to go into a different genre of horror into this one. And I know that some people responded with some trepidation to that. And still, even with the reviews, the reviews are good overall, but some people have some issues with some of that stuff. And I do too, but we're going to go ahead and get into it with this movie. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Or are you somewhere between on it? I want to know. Comment down below what you thought. As for myself, I would say overall, I was somewhere between on it. In the sense, though, I do think it's good. However, though, think that the first 50-60% of it is stellar. It's amazing. I thought that it really outshined the first one in a lot of different ways, including being scary. It was a lot scarier than the first one, and it also had a lot of ambition. I thought that it was the exact type of thing you would want a sequel to be doing in terms of elevating its story, elevating its world, having everything that it had to say, and expanding on it within the first one. It would have been kind of not a great choice if, the grabber came back in some sort of way and then we were stuck with, let's say, maybe his sister in like a situation where she was in a basement. And admittedly, yes, we can all picture a sequel in which that specific sort of setting happens, where here instead what they choose to do that I like a lot is amplify all of the emotions that are within the characters and the trajectory of their stories that they went on within the first one. I really liked Mason Thames in particular. He was in How to Train Your Dragon earlier this year, which I loved. I loved him in it. He continues to be a really outstanding young actor. And honestly, everyone here is. They're heavily qualified for this sort of thing, especially when we talk about new age acting, where I feel like someone like Ethan Hawke and someone like a different, more modern age actor, they act differently. Sometimes I feel like modern age acting, they don't quite have the same kind of digging deeper, I would say. Maybe that's what it is when it comes to how they approach acting. But these kids are different, in my opinion. I think that they work really well with the material and they give really outstanding performances. Honestly, it's kind of interesting to say this about a horror movie. I think that might be one of the best parts of it, are the performances of the main two. But what's ironic to me about this is when the grabber shows up in this, which of course he's becoming more of a modern day horror staple along with Art the Clown from Terrifier. I will find any way to mention those movies that I can, but the design's incredible. The performance is incredible. The area in which the movie declines for me, though, is when he shows up. I do actually kind of find it interesting. This is a sequel to The Black Phone 2, and it's not like I necessarily needed to be following Ethan Hawke's The Grabber around the entire time, but I don't think he shows up until about an hour into the movie. I think that there's like glimpses of him here and there. There's a little bit of backstory about him, but when he does show up, yes, he's naturally threatening, and yeah, of course, he's got this intimidating presence. The first initial phone call you have, there's a lot of build up for it, and then you hear his voice and the impact is there. But ironically enough, I felt like when he is brought in, then the movie kind of declines a little bit. But before we get there, before we get to issues, let's talk about the positives. The performances, yes, of course, are amazing. What I really liked as well is the emotional standpoint they chose to take within the context of this movie. I like that they chose to elevate Mason Thames' character, Finney, by making the introduction of his character in the beginning. He is, of course, still traumatized by this. He's still affected by it, and I like that it carries over into this movie. It's affecting him mentally quite a bit. He's kind of running away from it. And one of the parables I've always liked about the initial Black Phone, a movie I loved. I think we reviewed it, but I've watched it a lot since it came out. I think I've seen it a total of like 5 times, and I do think it's amazing. It's a really well told story. That one is more concentrated in its storytelling. This one is more like sprawling in terms of ambition for the types of narrative trajectory it's going for. And what I really like is that Ethan Hawke's character, the Grabber, it is implied what he is, which if you're reading into that, you of course know what I mean. He has the black van, he has the balloons, he kidnaps children, and they never quite show it, they never quite outright state it, but there is a line of dialogue, it's a monologue honestly, about it's a speech about how he doesn't want to be angry anymore, he doesn't want to be hurting anymore. And I really think that some of the best parts of this movie are when they're giving these really emotional speeches that they have about their situation and the feelings that they have. What separates this horror movie to me from some of the more traditional modern blockbusters that are horror movies are that, yes, some of them do lean into the horror movie aspect of it, and they turn more into this kind of like theme park aesthetic horror movie thing where they're there for the trajectory of being fun, and that's okay. I mean, I enjoy them heavily myself, but what separates this is it's also really interested. Scott Derrickson and C. Robert Cargill, the writer and director, are both very interested in delving into what these characters think about the world that they're in. It's not that the events of the first one happen and then these events are happening. It's that they are still recovering from the events of the first one while their past comebacks to haunt them. And that's really what the whole setup is, the past coming back to haunt them. Even though some of them aren't their own memories, it could be the remnants of trauma from before even they were born, whenever it was passed on with the Grabber Ethan Hawke and then the youth camp that he's in as well, which is a really interesting take in this movie. And here's the thing about this, that like if I sound all over the place, it's kind of because the movie itself has so many amazing elements in it. It has a lot of really, really great stuff. I think that I haven't even touched on the footage, the film footage stuff yet, but this movie as a whole, constructed, if we were to say overall how it works, I think the first like 60% of it is phenomenal. It's so great. The last 40%, it then turns into what I was saying some other modern horror blockbusters choose to do, which is that it kind of just gets fun. And I think the thing about that is, yes, the Grabber is an intimidating presence, but some of the mistakes I think that this movie makes in that final part of it is, honestly, I had one issue with the first movie. It's that I felt like Finney kind of figured it out a little bit too quickly in terms of the environment he was in and the presence of danger that he was in. And this one, they figure out the Grabber's motif, how he works, how to defeat him really, really fast. Like instantaneously. Almost too fast. Well, you know what? Not even almost. It was too fast. I thought that the diving between dreams and real life and the fact that there's this really well done finale that has them on this ice skating thing where he's ice skating, but it's on this ice, and we can see that he's stalking the characters that are present on screen, but they can't see it. So it makes for this additional tension that I really liked. But the follow through on this is that the Grabber doesn't kill anybody in this movie, which I find kind of strange because this is sort of technically under the slasher realm, and he is intimidating and he is a really strong presence, but then it's kind of undercut by the fact that they figure out how to defeat him immediately and that he doesn't kill anyone. I think that in the more modern age of horror icons, I know he's there. The Grabber, I was just at Universal Studios and a lot of his imagery is everywhere. I don't think it's forced. I know that some people are kind of claiming that this is the equivalent of like a industry plant for a horror icon. I certainly don't think so. I thought that in the first one he was really well done. In the second one, the performance is amazing. The dialogue, he is given these kinds of like, we'll get into the Freddy Krueger comparison, we will. But he is given these really great lines of dialogue, his performance. It's Ethan Hawke, so it's a given that he's going to be amazing in it. But the movie itself, it feels like it's almost working against all of that in terms of the ending. It feels like it's kind of undercutting him, and it's obviously not supposed to be on purpose, but I'm not saying I need things to be gory, I'm not saying that I even need things to try and like go into the massive gore fest stuff that, admittedly I enjoy. I just told you I love the Terrifier movies, I love Saw, but I know the time and place for that. This isn't going for that. But if you are going to make him the presence that he is, you want to earn that iconic status. To me, I feel you got to dive a little bit deeper into that stuff. I feel like the stuff early on, we'll touch on this now. The 8mm footage is a really well done trick. I think that whenever she has these dreams, the sister of Mason Thames' character Finney, they're so well done in the sense that in the first half, I noticed that like at the beginning, they imply that these kids are being killed. They even show it as well. I've noticed that movies are getting more daring in terms of showing the grisly imagery when it pertains to children. And if you're going to go for that, go for it. Like, it's one of those things where they committed to that, which is why I was confused why they didn't commit to some of the other stuff that does make the Grabber interesting as a character. Not everything needs to be explicitly said, right? Everything can be implicit, but if we're going to go down that realm, down that territory, we need to expand on why this character is so interesting. And it wants to get there. It feels like it wants to get there, but then you're kind of like, did a studio person say, no, you got to cut that out? Or what happened there? It felt like the movie for so long was like building up to this really grand finale that there's going to be this revelation type thing for all of these characters, and then it kind of backs off and then gets just fun and pivots tone and style and setting, which not setting, but tone and style and atmosphere. It was just sort of strange because I thought that the way it worked was the sister, the whole world itself. If you're going to claim that it's like these rules are complicated as hell, you're not wrong, but I do think that if a movie gives you a set of rules and it follows it, then I have no issue with that. My issue kind of comes whenever something starts breaking its own rules. And admittedly, sometimes I feel like this one's coming close, but it kind of finds like random narrative ways to be like, no, actually we said that the whole time. That's possible. And it didn't really bother me. If this was a worse movie, it probably would have bothered me, but it's still really quite good. And what's hampering it down is this thing that I'm talking about right now. But the dream sequences are so effective because I thought that the 8mm footage added this really grindhouse aesthetic, and the kids being shown, and there's like multiple times the makeup is phenomenal. There's this kid that has like this thing falling in half, and it shows it falling on half in his face over and over. It's effective every time. And this is one of those situations where the jump scares are highly effective. I've talked about how my opinion on jump scares has always been this way. If it pertains to the actual monster itself, if it's the actual monster in the case of whatever the threat is, or the effective scare, it actually means something. It isn't just, oh, the cat walks by and there's really loud noise. This never does that. And they're really effective. For example, some of the craziest jump scares I'd seen in the past couple of years was Smile 2. Loved that movie. I loved it a lot. This one as well aims to, in the dream sequences, even with the grindhouse footage, when it makes things feel like you are dreaming them. It feels not quite real, but it also feels nightmarish. So every time, yes, it does start to follow formula a little bit, but I dug it every single time. It never got stale for me. Where she'll fall asleep, and then the first initial setup of the dream will happen, and then it's like a jump scare. Then she wakes up, and then you can still see the grain. When the grain is still added, I thought that added an additional layer of tension, an additional layer of you being like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Gripping the seat. And that is so effective. But it stops, kind of, once the grabber shows up. He starts like... And the first two initial sequences where he's there and he is the threat are really well done. Ethan Hawke, the way he carries himself, the way he lumbers, the way that he kind of expresses himself with that like iconic thing he does with the hands, and he like looks up with the mask and all of that. And you can see these like really dark eyes kind of, and they start to look a certain way. Obviously your brain yourself is kind of piecing the imagery together, because that's kind of what something scary can do sometimes, is you start to imagine the threat yourself, and you kind of start seeing things, or maybe reading into something, and you're kind of like, well, is it actually doing that, or am I just seeing that from it? But it's still very effective no matter what. And honestly, where I thought the movie was going to end, where I was like, okay, I guess I could wrap up here, is there's this sequence where she's in the phone booth, Finney's sister is, and he like wraps the pole around her and then just like twists it, and then there's like blood flying everywhere, and she's spiraling, and then it cuts to the real life and she's spiraling out in the air. It's incredible. All of the effects, all of that stuff, the tension is still well done. I think that sometimes horror movies in the third act can kind of lose their sensibilities and just turn into an action movie to do all the payoff and all of that. I've just seen it a few separate times, and I thought that's kind of where this went also. But up to that point, I was like, oh, if this is the finale, and I was like, and that's great. This is going to be an amazing movie. Kind of went on for another 20 minutes after that. And then they set up that they have to go back to the ice. And that's kind of where I was like, okay, so this movie is sort of, I thought it kind of lost its way a little bit. And I was like, well, damn, because I thought the first half of it was a really incredible movie. I was like, this hammers home everything about the first one, and it expands on it in every single way possible. And then unfortunately what happens though is you are left with the ending whenever you leave something. It's the last thing you see. There's a couple of great things in the ending. There's one monologue from the sister to the mom. It was like an emotional resolution that I liked a lot. It's this really long shot with the landscape in the background, and then she's just having this emotional resolution. And for me, I know that that wasn't necessarily Finney's story, but I thought that it was kind of a weird thing that he didn't get that emotional resolution either, considering they are both sort of equal parts in this movie. The first one's about him. The second one is more about her, and they're kind of their side supportive characters in both. And I like that approach a lot. These movies are quite literally siblings to each other. I think that's a really interesting and smart and clever approach. But if you're going to thematically pay that off, I kind of feel like you should also do that for Finney as well. And I just thought it was weird that they didn't, but I do also like his thing of learning to let go of something that happened in the past, of overcoming a specific type of trauma, whether this be a metaphor for that, and you see that or not. That's how I saw it. But I mean, everything's up to interpretation, you know. And I also thought that that is carried over in the fact that the grabber's backstory is shown. I know a lot of people say that there needs to be more of him explained. There can be if they want to make one of those, but if they want to make a Black Phone 3, then that, I mean, that's fine too. I would like to see more and more of this character and the exploration of it. And the next time they do this, though, I think that he needs to be more of a threat. I think it's weird that my biggest issues with the movie stem from the fact that his entry creates problems for it. That honestly, the leftover, granted, this would turn more into Halloween Ends type territory if they pivoted into that with the second one, but hey, guess who's a defender of Halloween Ends? I am. And I was like, okay, if the grabber doesn't show up and it's just more about that, and this is more about like the missing kids aspect of it, and they mention the grabber, that would have been interesting. That would have been, maybe he could have been in the flashbacks and the dreams alone. But the Wild Bill stuff is fascinating. And I also thought that this movie had a lot of interesting stuff to say about the ties into, because I know that Scott Derrickson is of faith, and it seemed to have specific comments about how people treat religion and how they're kind of like, it's a practice what you preach type of thing, and some of the characters in this that do and don't. And I thought that was fascinating. I thought that was really interesting that they tackled that. And then it felt kind of more like it felt like an aside and not necessarily something that was really, really focused on. But it is a horror movie. It is scary. I think that the first half in particular is one of those things where, honestly, it's very scary. The footage, the kids, all of this stuff that's implied, all of this stuff that is shown is grisly and makes you uncomfortable, and it adds so much atmosphere to all of it. I noticed in the first half of this movie, honestly the whole thing, it is a slow burn. It has a different pace and tone than the first one does. The first one is really tight and concentrated. This one, like I said earlier, feels a bit more sprawling and kind of what it's doing, which I don't mind, of course, but then if the movie's going to start suffering and be unfocused from that, which is, let's admit it kind of does, then we need to have that really final gigantic payoff. And what, obviously you can't review the movie you want. You can review the movie you got. And for me, I really did enjoy this overall, but the one thing that I would add as just an additional thing is that I think that the grabber as a character is so interesting, and they set him up to be interesting. Credit to the writing. He is a fascinating character. But the whole thing about him kind of hampering his own movie is kind of strange. Obviously, he's the threat. He's the force. He's a force this time. And I love all this stuff with him, but then it feels like it kind of pivots into something else because he doesn't kill anyone, which is, if you're going to be a slasher, I feel like that's kind of a requirement for you, is to be able to kill someone within your movie. I mean, yes, the kids, but those are events that happened not within the context of when the movie takes place, but within the context of the flashbacks of the past. And the whole idea of like your past haunting you or the past haunting you, that's obviously like, it's a given, right? But here, I will take this in the sense that I love Nightmare on Elm Street. Freddy Krueger is my favorite horror icon ever. I have been on the hunt, much like a lot of other people, for a horror icon character to sort of fill in the gap for him, because New Line Cinema and all that, like Freddy Krueger, for some reason, it's like a nightmare to get, it's like a nightmare to get one of his movies made again, and I just don't think that's ever going to happen. But that's kind of why I'm like, well, I mean, Art the Clown is amazing in his own ways, and he reminds me of Freddy Krueger. This one, though, he kind of stole his whole flow. Like, Freddy Krueger obviously has the same sort of setup of like the implications of his feelings towards kids and his not so things that I really can't say, otherwise the video gets taken down, the things, but you know what I mean if you know the character. And the whole thing about that is, I think that it's funny to me that he's like, okay, I'm just going to copy Freddy Krueger's thing. But I guess no one ever said that Freddy Krueger, owned the rights to kill kids in their dreams, right? And it's not like the horror icon people are going to be sitting down going through like a legal dispute. It sounds like a sketch where it's like, hey, he took my whole thing. It's like, I don't know what you're talking about. No, I didn't. And he really did, though. It's this whole setup of like the dreams, and then once they started doing the thing where she starts getting harmed in the dream, then they show it in the actual reality, I was like, oh, okay. I mean, like, we're just going for it at this point. Which, I mean, hey, the people argue about the difference between homage and ripping off, and take what you will about that. But I think that if they were to do another one of these, and it's just going to be Nightmare on Elm Street from here on out, that's okay. I mean, I love Nightmare on Elm Street, and I love the concept of the dreams being haunting and creepy. It's such a fascinating idea. But why not, I suppose? I think that just for an initial one, if they're going to do another one and they don't go into the backstory of him as that's a separate movie, then whenever the whole thing about him coming back, which I also like the whole dead is just a word thing, it needs to be more of a threatening presence, and I think that actual harm needs to be done to certain characters if they're going to do something to that effect. But I really did like Ethan Hawke's performance in this, and I like this implication that there's this line he has where he's like, hell takes all of the worst parts out of you, but then he still seems a whole because he says that he's made of sin. I was like, that is awesome. That's really well done dialogue. Which is funny that I say that, because if we're gonna get into some other negatives, I love Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors. One of the things that movie does, though, is there are certain lines of dialogue that are very like, I'm reclaiming my power. I'm going to be like the best kid ever. You know, I defeated Freddy Krueger. And this one also does that. It's very clearly homaging specifically Nightmare on Elm Street 3 to me. But here's why it feels weird, is because you can kind of tell sometimes that this has two different writers, in the sense that you're like, there's this really emotional moment between, let's say, the dad of Finney and his sister. And then it pivots into the next scene. It's like a lot of one-liners towards like, yeah, I'm the best. I'm going to defeat you, the grabber. And you're like, it's just tonal whiplash. It felt so strange. And so, like, I didn't mind any of the stuff that was written. But if we're going to go for a tone, we got to pick one. Because this movie's also trying to like have this emotional resolve of all of this stuff it wants to say about overcoming trauma and about family dynamic and all this separate stuff. And I was like, that's all fascinating, but then it'll pivot again. And then the dialogue specifically of the girl, she's amazing in this, but then they start giving her the like, this is my dream type speeches and stuff, and you're like, well, I mean, yeah, but it just felt strange. It felt like it kind of kept going back and forth in the final like 30 minutes and couldn't really pick a lane. But those are kind of like my gripes with it. I do think it has a couple problems, but I think that it has a lot of amazing stuff in it. This is a movie that I primarily felt like I was so in love with it for such a long time. And then it kind of pivots, and then it just gets fun, and then it has its issues start to arise, and you're like, well, damn, because the first like 50-60% of it was phenomenal. But I loved the setting. Also, I haven't even touched on this. I usually always talk about this, but the camera work is really incredible. I thought that there's so much creative direction that Scott Derrickson takes with this, in terms of how he moves a camera, how he shows the ghosts of the kids, and how it all pivots back and forth, the way that it's really able to, in a visual language type of way, show you that they're pivoting into a dream, and then once it becomes the actual reality. There's even one where the grain dissolves and goes straight into the actual real life situation through showing the grain dissolving. I was like, that's amazing. That's how you know, to me, that I thought overall this movie justified its existence. Didn't feel like one of those things where it's like Sinister 2, actually, but from the same creative team, funny enough. But this one felt like it had its reason for existing. I didn't feel like it was like, well, we got to come up with another one because the first one made money. And to me, I thought it justified its existence in the end, which is feels like a backhanded compliment. But I also would watch this again. Is the first one a better movie overall? Yeah. But does this one have scarier things in it? Yes, absolutely. It's one of those things where I don't think it's a mixed bag. I think it's a very, very good movie that could have been great, but it's hampered down by its ending because of how it chooses to handle its central antagonist, which is kind of the problem, because the antagonist is the one on the poster. He is the main force. And again, no actual discredit to the character of the grabber himself. It's more about how they handle him. It's kind of like if we watched Nightmare on Elm Street 1 and they figured out how to defeat Freddy Krueger within the first like 30 minutes to an hour of the movie. It's like an hour and a half, right? Like 45 minutes into the movie. It just wouldn't be as effective if in the dreams they were like, oh, but I know what to do, and then defeat him kind of instantly. It feels like we're kind of following a big dummy around if we were to like have that. But I thought it was really good overall. I don't want it to sound like I like hated it or anything. I really quite liked it. I just can't say that I loved it, but I really, man, if the first like 50% of it and some of the other stuff towards the end, all there, but it had some more of making him an intimidating presence, this would have been like through the moon, like a perfect sequel. Instead, it is a very good sequel. I enjoyed quite a bit. And overall, I'm going to give it a score. I'm still going to give it a 4 out of 5. Very good. I thought it was very good. I just have my couple things in it that I would say. But overall, what did you think of the Black Phone 2? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Or are you somewhere between on it? And remember, please subscribe. Up next, I was late on this, but it'll be our next review is Tron Ares. Interesting one to talk about. We'll see. You'll see what I think. And thank you so much for listening and watching. I'll see you next time.